how much you put into the game, how much work ethic are you gonna put into it every single day, day in and day out. I've never cheated the process on wanting to be great in this game. I knew I had a God-given ability, but that only takes you so far if you don't use that ability and start putting in work every single day.
LeBron James has repeatedly stated that he has never cheated the game and takes pride in playing the right way. But a recent moment highlighted by an NBA commentator has sparked debate after footage from a fourth-quarter sequence was questioned while pointing to the scoreboard, and although no clear response has come from LeBron or his camp, the situation has led fans to wonder whether he is still fully competing at the highest level or simply continuing to build on his already historic list of records as his career progresses.
At what point are you going to start showing his age?
Like 4 years ago.
Okay, you show the video of LeBron again, man.
Don't that look like that meme that put the cigarette in his mouth?
That's Miami Bron. He got the thin neck.
Some would call the Ozempic neck.
At some point, you going to start the season and then not play for 20 games and come back. You better not come out there dunking it. I don't want to see no dunks.
So when people say, is he declining? We was in a league where when he jumped, his chin was over the rim.
Yeah, we know he declined.
Over the rim. Now, you see this. It looked good for them because they don't remember the guy who was sitting here looking at the rim. Now we see him on a fast break. We can see, yeah, he's slow, right? He used to be 110 speed out of 100. Now he probably, 91, 92? That was that LeBron. This LeBron, he does look old.
Let's put it plainly. In a recent appearance on Fox Sports on the Ball, commentator Ric Bucher didn't shy away from what many only hint at, suggesting that LeBron James has, at times, remained in games with the clear intention of reaching statistical milestones, arguing that this pattern has become frequent enough to feel almost routine. The comment has reignited debate among fans and analysts about whether these late-game minutes are still about pure competition or increasingly about shaping a historic record sheet as his career continues to unfold.
LeBron James has stayed in games to achieve some sort of statistical mark so routinely now that we're almost numb to it. The latest being the oldest player to ever achieve a triple-double. Can't remember who they were playing. I just know that the game was out of hand. There was no reason for him to be on the floor. I believe Austin Reeves ended up grabbing 2 rebounds that LeBron wanted so that he could complete the triple-double and get off the floor.
Not surprising. Not exceptional. Routine. That word choice matters because routine doesn't point to a one-off mistake or a moment that needs special context to explain it away. Routine suggests repetition, something that keeps showing up in the same way over time. And if you've been paying close attention, the argument goes, you don't just see it once, you recognize the pattern as soon as it appears again. The specific moment Bucher pointed to came on February 13, 2026, when LeBron James, then 41 years and 44 days old, faced the Dallas Mavericks and delivered a triple-double performance with 28 points, 12 assists, and 10 rebounds. The headline practically wrote itself. He became the oldest player in NBA history to record a triple-double. But for critics like Ric Bucher, that game is now being used as an example in a broader argument about whether late-career performances like this are purely competitive greatness or also tied to the pursuit of historic statistical milestones.
We are set for action here on Prime. LaRavia to James, 3-on-1 developing. Board. 5-on-4, Williams slow to get up. James is going to hoist. And hit a 3! He can do a whole lot with that in terms of creativity. Corner, Hachimura, booking.
How good can your zone be adapting to what each other team's trying to do to you?
Shake and bake. James flings it up. It's good and a foul. He turns it over. James, the locomotive to the rim.
Unfortunately tonight.
In transition, LeBron James fighting for waves of defenders, and he gets the roll. Hayes clears it. LeBron,
oh my. The same team.
Yes,
It's true. I don't want to create any divides between studio and booth.
Cameras caught the moment. The arena recognized the milestone, and social media quickly turned it into another viral highlight for LeBron James, another entry in a record book already filled with historic achievements. However, commentator Ric Bucher argued that the context mattered just as much as the stat, claiming the game situation was already decided and suggesting there was no clear competitive need for him to still be on the floor at that point, while some viewers online also pointed to replay clips and debated whether teammates, including Austin Reeves, were involved in late-game sequences where rebounds were being secured as LeBron chased the final numbers needed to complete the triple-double, turning what should have been a routine statistical finish into yet another flashpoint in the ongoing discussion about how his late-career moments are being interpreted.
The guy staying around at age 41 just to get an extra rebound, just to say in the history books, when everybody forgets how it was done, that he was the oldest guy to get a triple-double, that is stat chasing. That is undermining the statistical achievement. And with LeBron, he loves to say that he's never cheated the game. And it seems like not only with LeBron, but a lot of people these days, every declaration is actually a confession.
In a late-game moment involving LeBron James, critics pointed to what they described as an unusual situation in a game already decided, where the focus appeared to shift toward securing one final rebound needed for a triple-double rather than affecting the outcome, sparking debate over intent and competitiveness. Commentator Ric Bucher sharpened the criticism by arguing that some declarations can start to feel like confessions, suggesting that the more strongly a public figure insists they are not engaging in certain behavior, the more closely their actions tend to be scrutinized for signs that might tell a different story. LeBron James has spent years insisting that he has never cheated the game, repeating that message consistently as part of his public identity. But critics argue that those words become harder to reconcile every time he remains on the floor in a game that is already decided just to reach another statistical milestone. Now the context, they say, makes the debate even sharper because the Los Angeles Lakers sit at 41-25 and lead the Pacific Division, meaning the team is already in a strong competitive position where winning isn't in question. Yet the focus on late-game numbers continues to fuel arguments about whether these moments are pure competition or something more record-driven. They are on a 4-game winning streak and sitting firmly as a legitimate playoff contender in the Western Conference, which makes the current moment for LeBron James especially significant if the stated goal is truly another championship, because this is no longer about future possibilities but a real, active postseason push that demands focus, consistency, and leadership. Yet the public conversation around him is not centered on playoff readiness or team momentum, but instead on debates about late-game minutes, statistical milestones, and how his final stretches in already decided games are being interpreted, creating a clear contrast between what the team is doing on the court and what is dominating the narrative of it.in. The way critics are framing it, the focus on an oldest player triple-double in a blowout against Dallas is being treated as a deliberate narrative choice rather than a coincidence, especially when discussing LeBron James. The argument goes that if the sole priority were a deep playoff run and a 5th championship, then late-game minutes in already decided situations would likely be unnecessary, with rest and load management taking precedence instead of continuing to chase individual statistical milestones. From that perspective, moments like the Mavericks game become more than just a record-setting footnote. They become part of a broader debate about whether team success or historical legacy is driving late-career decisions, particularly when the playoffs are only weeks away and every minute of wear and tear matters. Unless the milestone itself is part of the broader plan, unless what some describe as legacy management over the past decade is still the central storyline and the championship narrative is simply the public-facing version of something more layered, then the interpretation of late-game moments around LeBron James takes on a different tone. And within that same roster context, the discussion shifts again when you look at what is happening on the floor, because Austin Reeves is having a breakout season, averaging 23.9 points, 4.8 rebounds, and 5.5 assists, evolving from an undrafted guard into a core piece of a first-place team while entering a major contract year, while Luka Doncic is posting elite production at 32.9 points, 7.9 rebounds, and 8.5 assists, giving the broader picture of a team built around both rising and established stars, making the debate less about isolated highlights and more about how individual legacy, team success, and long-term strategy all intersect in the same season. Framed from this perspective, the role of LeBron James becomes more about fit than force, especially on a roster that is increasingly defined by other high-usage creators. With Luka Doncic operating as the primary engine of the team's offense and Austin Reeves emerging as a high-impact secondary creator, the argument is that the Lakers' current success is being driven by those two as the main focal points, while LeBron's production, 21.4 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 7.0 assists at age 41, is still valuable but closer to that of a complementary star than a franchise centerpiece, which naturally shifts the discussion toward what his optimal role should look like on a contender. From that viewpoint, critics question whether extended minutes in already decided games make strategic sense at this stage of the season, particularly if the team's identity and long-term direction are already anchored around younger primary options, turning what might otherwise be seen as routine veteran involvement into a broader debate about priorities, efficiency, and legacy versus present-day team structure. In this framing, the discussion around LeBron James shifts from in-game moments to the broader weight of his career achievements, with the record book now reflecting an unprecedented accumulation of milestones: 43,127 regular season points, over 50,000 combined points across regular season and playoffs, all-time playoff scoring leadership, and 152 career triple-doubles, placing him among the most statistically dominant players in NBA history. Supporters view these numbers as the product of sustained excellence across 2 decades at the highest level, while critics argue that the frequency and visibility of late-career milestone moments, especially in lower-leverage game situations, have intensified scrutiny over how those records are being accumulated, turning what would traditionally be celebrated as historic longevity into a more contested conversation about context, timing, and narrative emphasis. The points records, in this view, are the clearest example of what happens when a historically gifted scorer like LeBron James sustains elite production over more than 2 decades, and that part is widely accepted as legitimate even by his harshest critics. Where the debate begins is in interpretation, with some arguing that longevity itself is a choice that naturally shapes how those records are built, especially when milestones like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's field goal record or all-time scoring marks come into reach and become part of the surrounding conversation about usage, minutes, and late-career decision-making. From that perspective, critics suggest the narrative shifts subtly when a player is aware of the historical thresholds in front of him, while supporters maintain it is simply the byproduct of sustained greatness and professionalism. Led into this broader discussion is the continued attention around Bronny James, whose selection by the Lakers in the 2024 NBA draft drew immediate scrutiny and intensified media focus on the family storyline, a dynamic that some argue inevitably adds emotional and public complexity to how LeBron's later career choices are viewed. Fair or not. In this narrative, the Bronny James draft situation became a flashpoint because it tied the basketball decisions of the LeBron James era in Los Angeles to broader questions about influence, perception, and front office dynamics. Critics labeled the move as nepotism, arguing that selecting Bronny in the second round of the 2024 NBA draft created the impression that roster decisions were being shaped by off-court relationships as much as on-court evaluation, while supporters countered that it was still a legitimate basketball decision within draft parameters. Reports of tension involving Jeanie Buss and the Lakers' leadership added another layer of scrutiny, prompting Ric Bucher, LeBron's agent, to publicly emphasize respect for the organization and reaffirm the strength of the partnership in an effort to stabilize the narrative. Over time, however, the episode has remained part of a larger debate about how LeBron's career decisions are interpreted, whether they reflect standard player empowerment in modern sports or, as critics argue, a consistent pattern of shaping team circumstances around personal priorities while framing those choices primarily through the lens of competition and winning. In this interpretation, the entire conversation around LeBron James becomes less about isolated incidents and more about intent, with critics arguing that everything from the Bronny James draft situation to late-game statistical milestones reflects personal dimensions that are natural for any athlete but complicated by the scale of his influence and visibility. The key tension, they suggest, is not that these interests exist, but that they are often framed publicly as being purely about winning, teammates, and competitive sacrifice. Meanwhile, Lakers head coach J.J. Redick has publicly emphasized LeBron's role in supporting teammates like Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, presenting his approach as selfless within a team structure that depends on communication and stability, even as critics question whether certain late-game actions in already decided contests align with that description. In that gap between public framing and on-court interpretation, the debate continues, centered not just on what is happening, but on what those moments are believed to represent. In this framing, the debate around LeBron James is no longer about isolated highlights, but about interpretation of a larger pattern. One critics argue includes moments like the Bronny James draft decision, agent-led public messaging, and late-game appearances in already decided contests that produced statistical milestones. From that perspective, These actions are viewed not as random occurrences, but as part of a deliberate approach to managing how a legacy is constructed and communicated over time within a franchise where he holds significant influence. At the same time, supporters and team figures, including coach JJ Redick, have publicly emphasized his role as a stabilizing presence alongside primary stars like Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, framing his behavior as leadership and professionalism rather than self-interest. The result is an increasingly polarized discussion. One side seeing consistency and greatness expressed through longevity and record-setting production, and the other seeing strategic legacy management that clashes with how selfless competition is publicly defined. LeBron James has built one of the most accomplished careers in sports history, but greatness does not automatically place a player beyond scrutiny, and the current debate reflects that tension between legacy and accountability. Critics argue that recent conversations around late-game statistical milestones, roster influence, and long-term narrative control point to a broader theme of legacy management, while supporters counter that these same factors are simply the natural outcome of 2 decades of elite performance and modern player empowerment in the NBA. Ultimately, the discussion has shifted from what he has achieved, which is undisputed at an historic level, to how those final chapters of his career are being interpreted in real time, and whether the story being written now aligns with the way fans and analysts believe greatness should look in its closing act.